I thought it would be interesting to test some of the common tips for crocheting neat or granny squares and see if they make a difference or not. So I crocheted a baseline granny square following a typical granny square pattern, and then 5 additional squares, each using a different tip that's supposed to reduce the granny lean and make a neater looking square. Here's what I found. The first tip I put to the test is this: chain 5 at the beginning of the round, creating the last double crochet and the corner with that chain, rather than starting with 3 chains. What this does is keep the join in the same corner, but on a different group of 3 double crochet. So on my first granny square, I'm chaining 5 at the beginning, and then when I come back around, I'll join with a slip stitch to the 4th chain, so I've got my corner there intact. I normally love this tip for a solid granny square, but not so much for a traditional granny square. This was a big surprise for me because I always use this method. It does hide the chain, but that group kind of looks a little off and the corner a little misshapen. The next tip I put to the test is omitting the chain between the groups of 3 double crochets just on the sides. The idea of reducing the gap to make it look neater makes perfect sense, and I'll be honest, I use this tip all the time. So needless to say, it was really interesting to make this comparison, and I was completely surprised. When you leave out the chains, it makes a noticeable difference in the size. These are both crocheted with the same size hook. The lean is still there, but maybe slightly less pronounced. But the biggest difference is seen in the final round. The lack of chain or stitches to fill those gaps really does affect the overall shape. The third tip I put to the test is to use a hook that's one size smaller than you would normally use. The theory is that by using a smaller hook, you condense the stitches, which cause 2 things to happen. One, it makes the stitches look neater just because they're tighter, more condensed. And 2, it'll make a sturdier fabric that's perhaps less susceptible to the granny lean, that twisting. I was skeptical about this one, thinking I'd only see a difference in the size of the square and not an improvement to the shape or reducing the lean, but I was very wrong. Our baseline square on the left was crocheted with a 5.5mm hook, so the test square here on the right was crocheted with a 5mm hook. And there's a noticeable difference here. It's smaller, like we would expect, but the shape is more square, and the lean, it's just not there anymore. The fourth tip I put to the test is a popular one: to flip the square every round. Now, I've never actually tried this, but it makes a lot of sense when trying to get rid of that spiraling granny lean. If you pay close attention to your squares, you'll notice it will lean in the direction of the round, so counterclockwise for right-handed crocheters and clockwise for left-handed crocheters. So it makes perfect sense to say that crocheting in the same direction without flipping is why the corners are twisting and the cause of the lean. Well, here are the results. Again, baseline granny square on the left and my square flipped every round on the right. I think it's pretty safe to say the lean isn't there, so flipping definitely helps with that. I'd say the big downfall here, though, is that every other round looks a little bit different. That may not be noticeable to some, but it might be very noticeable to others. The last tip I put to the test is to start each round in a different corner. The downfall for this one was blatantly obvious, because starting in a different corner means more cutting and more ends. So unless you're changing colors every round, this isn't a practical option, but let's give it a chance. Well, here are the results. For the right square, I started the round in the corner behind the previous round, and what do you know? It did reduce the granny lean. Not by a lot, it's still there a little bit, but there is a slight improvement. I have to say, this was a pretty eye-opening experiment. The tip that seemed least likely to me to improve the shape and reduce the granny lean was actually the front runner in a side-by-side comparison. That dropping down a hook size really did make the biggest impact in this little test. But what if we use more than one tip in the same square? What if we take our favorites from each of the individual tests and put them together? Will it look neater than the one square that used a smaller hook? Here are the individual results I preferred the look of from the 5 tips, and therefore those I'm putting into one square. Yours might be a little bit different, and that's totally fine. These are just my preferences. For the first tip, I liked the look of the chain 3 at the beginning with a slight modification. I used a chain 2 because 2 chains match the height of my double crochet better than 3 chains because I crochet a little tighter than most people. For the second tip, I'm sticking to my roots on this one and omitting the chain in between. For the third tip, definitely using the smaller hook size after seeing those results. For the fourth tip, I really wasn't crazy about the look of flipping, so I'm keeping the rounds in the same direction for this next square. And for the fifth tip, I plan to change colors every round anyways, so I'll start in a different corner each round because I'm already going to have those ends. Here are the results. Our baseline granny again on the left, and my new square on the right with my preferential combination of tips. All in all, I'm pretty happy with this, although I still think the chain in between the groups might help with the pulling that you can see on the corners. And here is that same square with my combination of tips compared to my favorite from the individual test where I just used a standard granny square pattern with a smaller hook. I think it's pretty safe to say you can significantly reduce the granny lean and the need to block hundreds of squares with some or all of these tips, and that's enough to make me actually want to finish this project. Now, we haven't done a comparison of methods video like this before, so let me know what you think. Let me know by either liking the video, which is a super quick, easy thing to do, or even better, leave me a comment. Let me know that you want to see more stuff like this, and again, what you would want me to compare or test. I would love to do more of these if you think it'll be helpful or interesting to watch. That's all for now, friend. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That's a quick little thing you can do that's a huge help for me to keep sharing the hobby we both love. Happy hooking, and I'll see you in the next one.